Welcome to our special coverage on Sky News of the coronavirus crisis. Our top stories: Peter Dutton, the first Australian politician to contract the virus. The Home Affairs Minister is in hospital. Questions now about whether his cabinet colleagues, including the Prime Minister, have been infected. The coronavirus crisis escalates elsewhere too. Mass gatherings of more than 500 people banned from this Monday. The federal and state governments establish a national cabinet, the nation's leaders to meet weekly as they ramp up their pandemic plan. And all Australians asked to reconsider their need to travel overseas, with general warnings now in place for any foreign country. Good evening. Australia is facing a pandemic threat unprecedented in recent history, and in response, today our nation's leaders have announced an unprecedented reaction. Tonight we'll take you through what you need to know about mass gatherings, travel warnings and the government's response. First, let's go straight to our political editor Andrew Clennel on this breaking news over the last hour or two about Peter Dutton. Andrew, Peter Dutton, a senior minister in the cabinet, has spent hours with colleagues in the last few days, and he's tested positive now to COVID-19. What are the implications of that for the government?
Well, the implications are rather large, Kieran. You've got cabinet ministers who are awaiting advice from the Prime Minister's office at the moment as to whether they need to be tested for COVID-19. I've just spoken to one of them. The Prime Minister's office, in turn, is getting advice from the Chief Medical Officer as to whether the cabinet ministers need to be tested. Normally, the public health information is if you are at close quarters to someone for 2 hours, you should go and get tested. On Tuesday, there was a 4-hour cabinet meeting. We could have a situation the entire cabinet, including the Prime Minister, is being tested. It's also been put to me, we could have a situation where the Chief Medical Officer himself is required to be tested, because it's been suggested to me that Mr Dutton might have been at an NSC meeting or some other forum where Mr Murphy was present for some time as well. So that really is extraordinary stuff. Let's have a look now at the statement Mr Dutton released just before 6 p.m. tonight. He said, "This morning I woke up with a temperature and a sore throat. I immediately contacted the Queensland Department of Health and was subsequently tested for COVID-19. I was advised by Queensland Health this afternoon that the test had returned positive. It is the policy of Queensland Health that anyone who tests positive is to be admitted into hospital, and I've complied with their advice. I feel fine and will provide an update in due course." On the Today Show this morning, the hosts on Channel 9 announced that Mr Dutton wasn't coming on because of a stomach bug. Now let's have a look too at a social media a post from Mr Dutton's recent trip to the US, where you'd have to guess that he got that from. Let's have a look. He met Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump's daughter and senior advisor. He met Attorney General William Barr and several other important people. So you see how this virus can spread, and there are certainly fears within the government that it can end up hitting tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in Australia. The whole purpose with this public gatherings policy measure is to try and slow it as much as possible. Just incidentally, I asked who sat closest to Mr Dutton in cabinet, in case anyone wants to know. Simon Birmingham, Karen Andrews and Susan Lee, I was told. So they'll be first out the door getting tested, I reckon.
I would have thought so, and we know that the Treasurer has been sick the last few days as well. He's been working overtime on the stimulus package, so their immune systems, you'd have to think, aren't the best right now anyway. So you've got a situation where one of the senior politicians in the land has got this, and the question is, Andrew, if others have got it as well, how does Cabinet come back and pass the stimulus package? Is there a chance that Parliament's suspended for the foreseeable future, and therefore that stimulus package awaits to be passed? Surely they've got to find a way to get that legislated, to get that money going, because right now we're heading for a very, very difficult time if that's not in place in an economic sense, let alone a health sense.
Oh, look, I think we're heading for a very, very difficult time economically anyway, especially after this public gatherings development today. That will mean confidence goes through the floor in the economy. People will be less likely to go out generally. But I think it will all depend on the testing. I don't think there's any argument that the entire cabinet will have to be tested. We saw with Peter Dutton, they got the test back quite quickly. The hope is, I guess, that everyone gets tested and gets a clean bill of health. But I can't see how Scott Morrison, under these circumstances, can go to the footy tomorrow, as he's suggesting. If there's any sort of cloud, you know, it just cannot happen. We are still awaiting a statement from the Prime Minister's office. I guess they're seeking advice from Brendan Murphy, the CMO, and grappling with how to deal with this is yet another major development in this crisis.
And Andrew, I understand the thinking behind what Scott Morrison's doing in terms of saying, I'm going to go to the footy, you know, just they don't want to build the panic too much. But regardless of that, now you've got these bans in place. One of his cabinet ministers has got it. There's no way he can go because, as you said quite rightly at the top of the program, if you've been exposed to someone, you're meant to self-isolate.
Well, he's kind of getting dragged to not going to the footy, isn't he? Like, you know, he acted quickly on the travel ban with China, but on a couple of other issues here, it's like circumstances have forced him into a situation like the ban on public gatherings, and it is contradictory that he said he would nevertheless go to the football. That was quite confusing. I'm not sure, to be frank, that that's the ideal message. It turns out probably he won't be going anyway, but you can't, I don't think so on the one hand, don't go to the footy, but I'm going to the footy. I mean, it just makes no sense. The argument that's been put to me this afternoon on that, Kieran, is he doesn't want to create panic, the sort that saw toilet paper just fly out of stores and be overrun. He doesn't want to create hysteria. That's been put to me as a difficult balance. He wants to show it's not that bad. Very much the language is they're ahead of the curve, and they are. They're acting, they see themselves as acting, the government and governments, before it gets worse. What was put to me today by a state government official is that they were surprised that there hadn't been action on public gatherings and that Mr Morrison was looking to go to the football because they said he must be getting the same advice as us, that it's coming hard and it's coming fast and you need to get out ahead of it. That's what happened at that COAG meeting after a phone hookup of the medical officers. They got out ahead of it. The other development that occurred before that COAG meeting, as I understand it, there was some modelling provided to government which showed very clearly that if they acted harder, if they went harder, there'd be less pressure on the hospital system and that would help them in the long run, Kieran.